The United States is the world's indispensable nation. Well, that's what we used to tell ourselves, and that some still actually do. But the world order is shifting, and a lot of it is happening right under our noses, but apparently not that we're noticing. Many key Americans and Westerners seem to be oblivious to what's happening, but the Russian president does not appear to be confused at all. And in fact, he's starting to show a lot more of a confidence in what he's doing. Not that he was unconfident before, but now it seems to be elevated to a new level, especially with all what's been going on with BRICS in recent months, then with the SCO meeting, and then now with this meeting in Beijing between President Putin and Xi Jinping of China, among others. And to try to unpack a lot of this about where this may be going next and what may be the ramifications both for Ukraine and the United States, we have Larry Johnson, head of Sonar21.com, former CIA analyst, and son of New American Revolution on Substack. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I'm always appreciative of the invitation. Try not to wear out my welcome.
Oh, I can't imagine that's ever going to happen, especially because of all the cool things you say and the great wardrobe you always bring to the show. So that's a big plus. We don't get that with everybody. So
yeah.
Snappy dresser. Listen, I want to start off with this one comment. It's kind of a short one here. But it's really powerful and punchy that Putin said. We've shown several times where the Russian ambassador Nebenzia to the United Nations has said that Russia will accomplish its objectives on the negotiating table or on the battlefield. We had on our own show Ambassador Polyansky, who said directly the same thing. But now we have President Putin himself directly saying this.
We'll see how the situation develops, how it unfolds. Well, if not, then we will have to accomplish our goals via military means.
So he's pretty matter-of-factly. He's not like thundering, rhetoric. He's not beating the podium. He's just like saying, yeah, we'll either get it, through the negotiations or we'll take it on the battlefield. Next question. What do you make of that? Because that seems like a lot of confidence to be saying.
Yeah. What a contrast with Donald Trump. Here's Donald Trump. I've stopped 7 wars. We're the hottest. We're the best. We're the greatest. And, anytime you have to be that focused on yourself and talking about yourself, it's a sign that, you got problems. Whereas here's Putin. Hey, look, we're trying to negotiate. And if the negotiations don't work it out, we're going to win it on the battlefield. No anger, no fret or worry visible. And, frankly, I wish we had someone like Vladimir Putin for president in the United States right now, in my own view.
Well, and I think probably, it's hard to argue with that, at least somebody with that kind of clarity, strategic thought, and character. But let's look at maybe some of the reasons why Putin is even more confident than he has been. He's never lacked for any confidence, but there seems to be a bigger swagger, an unstated swagger, not just among him, but among a number of folks really in the East. And I think a lot of that has to do with the, all these meetings I mentioned there at the SCO, at the BRICS, at the 80th anniversary of the winning of World War II for China and their pretty impressive military parade they had earlier today.
Yeah.
You wrote a piece on Sonar 21 recently, though. I'd like to talk a little bit about and see if you can kind of put this in context. You talk about that there's a new emerging world order. Now, George Bush famously says he made a new world order after Desert Storm and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What are we seeing now?
So we saw this photo that emerged from the first day of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. It was accompanied by a video. And the expressions on the face of Putin, of Modi, and of Xi, they're relaxed. There's no tension, and the laughs are genuine. Now,
yeah.
So some really funny memes have popped up on social media. For example, one of the memes shows them laughing, and the subtitle says, "Yeah," and Donald Trump thinks his tariffs are going to work, and it shows them laughing. Or another one said, "Hey, did you hear Macron's wife is a dude?" Or I mean, it was just people had fun with it. But what this really illustrated is these 3 countries, and maybe Trump does deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for this.
Oh, man.
Because through his efforts, through his actions, Trump has brought these three countries together in the closest relationship they've had in history, in recorded history. There's never been a situation where Russia, India, and China were talking and pledging to cooperate in this manner. And they represent there are the five top economies in the world. The United States is one of those five. The other four include India, China, and Russia. So three of those top five were right there represented. Now that's some economic power. And the difference right now is, whereas the United States has a debt to GDP ratio of 125%, which means we're spending a lot more money than we're bringing in. Each one of those countries, India, I think, has the worst debt to GDP ratio, and it's only at 74%. Russia's at 19%. But their economies, India's got the fastest growing economy right now, followed by China. Russia's is at 1.5% for this year because they took measures to counter inflation. But all those economies are growing, and they represent more people. Just the almost 3 million people, 3 billion people represented by those three countries, with China and India being the lion's share. In the United States, with 340 million. And then, as you noted in the earlier remarks, if you simply stayed up and watched the Chinese military parade, you compare what that was to that thing that Trump put on, and Trump was so proud. Yeah, he reminds me of a kid that has got a soapbox derby racer, and it's just been built out of cardboard and such. Man, he's proud of it, and good for the kid. But don't compare yourself to a Formula One race car driver, okay? And that's what we saw there. China was driving in a Formula One race car, and Trump was in a soapbox derby car. And It's just jealous.
Listen, I served a full career in the military, very proud of the service that I gave in the U.S. Army. But, man, you can't be honest and not say the dramatic gulf between what was put on there. And people can say, okay, well, that was a parade. They do parades better than we do, but it's the muscle that counts. Yeah, I'm not so sure that isn't also falling in the favor of the Chinese and the Russians right now.
Yeah, well, just the drill to get those guys marching in unison and marching the way they did, people don't understand how difficult that is. So if you can organize and train an event like that, maybe you're pretty good at organizing and training some other things that pertain to warfare, because it's always in the details. If you're sloppy about the details, and when we had U.S. military personnel walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, they were out of step. They weren't in unison. They weren't in sync.
I saw
it. And you know what that means is you just don't give a shit. I mean, it's lack of caring. This showed they cared. Whoever was in charge of that, they said, look, we don't want these people. And it wasn't just that one group marching. Every single thing that was done was scripted, organized, and it's like it was done by animatronics.
And I even referring back to the people during our parade this summer that were out of step, Larry, I remembered at the time watching this. I remember when I was in 1985, Private Daniel Davis, in basic training. And by the end of that 6 weeks, we were marching in lockstep, and that was a major thing that they wanted to teach us to work together and all that. And we were in lockstep, and I'm thinking, how can this not be in lockstep at least? And okay, we can't match this, but gracious, I mean, they weren't even in step.
Yeah. And I mean, here you weren't just dealing with 20 guys or 50 guys. You were dealing with thousands, and they pulled it off, and in a way that is truly remarkable. Now, you're right; that doesn't necessarily translate to combat effectiveness on the battlefield. But it's certainly a contributing factor that do you have the planning capability to prepare and then execute a task. And that's what was demonstrated here by the Chinese in a remarkable way.
Now, I haven't seen any specific reports on it, but I can just imagine and wonder what your thoughts are that the closeness between the Russian and Chinese militaries, that their lessons learned that they're learning on the battlefield in Ukraine, I would certainly imagine are being transferred over to the Chinese side. So when they're training on the modern aspects of real war, what it's really like on the ground. And I don't think anyone can question that China has a significant military technological advantage over anyone in the West. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And again, you go back and look at the Rand Corporation report that was written in 2019, and then the other report that was done by A. Wes Mitchell that was published in National Interest in August of 2021, but was prepared for the Pentagon and given to them in December of 2020. Both of these reports focused upon creating a situation that they said we can't have a situation where China and Russia come together. So we've got to come up with a strategy to split them apart. And the way to split them apart is to get Russia into a war, weaken Russia, defeat Russia, force Russia to come recognize that the West is superior, and then we can go after China. Well, clearly that strategy is no longer working. And as they've come together, the cooperation has not just been economic, it's not just been political, but it has been military. And China's been able to supply Russia with some things, but Russia is also supplying China with some critical needed oil and gas. So this is not a lopsided relationship. This is a relationship of mutual respect.
And I wonder if you can go down that path, because one of the other things that Putin said today, and I don't have this soundbite, he was talking about a new pipeline and gas project he has, which is going to ensure that more of the Russian oil and gas goes to China. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this pipeline is going to basically bring in gas and oil from as far away as Siberia into China. This is really a diversion of oil and gas that used to go to Europe. So right now, Putin is demonstrating that they're making a clear break with before Russia was still wanting to be part of Europe. Hey, can't we be part of you? Made repeated requests and always rebuffed. By starting with George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, all rebuffed. So Russia is now saying, okay, we're turning east. And this is, once that pipeline's in place, China's got another secure source of oil and gas where it doesn't have to worry about tankers getting interdicted on the high seas.
So correct me if I'm wrong also, but that implies then that even once this war is over, unlike what was talked about in earlier rounds, once the war could be over, then the West and East could get back to turning the gas on, and they could get that cheap gas on to revitalize their Western economies. But now it looks like that Russia is in a position that cheap gas ain't coming back to Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, they're not making that a priority. They will. Russia remains, at least under Putin, open to trying to reestablish relationships with all of Europe. They continue to sell oil and gas primarily to Slovakia and Hungary. What's really interesting is if you look at who Russia is trading with, you find that a number of European countries and the United States, despite all the sanctions, we continue to import from Russia.
That is crazy.
So, that's why I say, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And, the fact of the matter is Russia is blessed with natural resources that 99% of the other countries in the world don't have. And Russia is more than happy to export those, but it's going to be done on a reciprocal basis of respect. And it's going to be done in accordance with what benefits Russia economically. And instead, the West is obsessed with fighting Russia, destroying Russia. It's crazy.
Yeah, and bitterly failing. I'll add in there too. One of the things that has been a source of recent mocking, I want to say the last time we had you on here, maybe it was the time before, we showed a soundbite from Emmanuel Macron where he was mocking the Russian military, saying, well, since November of 2023, they've only taken 1 additional percent of Ukrainian territory. So they're not all that great. It's not for sure they're going to win, et cetera.
Yeah.
And Vladimir Putin today spoke about that situation where he said, it's not really about territory, it's about the people.
To be honest, I want to emphasize this. We are fighting not so much for territories, but for human rights and for the rights of people who live in these territories, to speak their own language, to live within the framework of their culture, within the framework of traditions that have been passed down from previous generations, from their fathers, from their grandfathers, and so on. This is, first of all, what we are talking about. And if these people, during electoral democratic procedures, including during referendums, spoke out in favor of being part of the Russian Federation, this opinion must be respected.
Now, many in the West will say, you're just trying to put a good face on it. You actually can't take any more territory. That's why you haven't. And Russia doesn't care anything about people. They just throw their guys in meat wave tactics all the time anyway. What are you saying?
Well, it's just simply not true. So let's start with the territorial interest. One of the arguments is, look, Russia only has 19% of Ukraine. Okay, this is a lawyer's lie, a math trick. Yeah, if you take all of Ukraine and measure the Donbass and that territory, yeah, it only represents like 19% of Ukraine. Russia's not fighting for the 60% of Ukraine that is west of the Dnieper River. They are concerned about the 40% of Ukraine that's to the east of the river. So all of a sudden, instead of Russia only like 19%, they're closer to controlling 40% of all that territory, except they're not going into Poltava, Sumy. They're in Sumy a little bit. They're in Kherson a little bit, Dnipropetrovsk a little bit. But the fact is, of the areas that they focused on from the outset, the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, they're well over 80%. And they've made it very clear. They're not about the launch. If they were launching human wave attacks, the bodies of the Russian soldiers would be stacked up. And when it comes time to exchange dead cadavers, that the Ukrainians would be turning over more Russians than the Russians were turning over Ukrainians. But that hasn't been the case. This last exchange of bodies, for every single dead Russian, there were 20 dead. Or let's see, it was 20. There's a 50 times one to 50 ratio.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So 19 dead Russians and 1,000 dead Ukrainians. Now, people say, well, see, though, that's just because the Russians are advancing. Exactly. Yeah.
Let's go with it. Yeah. Actually,
Let's use that. Let's use that argument. Because you're just telling me that they weren't making any progress. So which is it? They're not making any progress. They're launching human wave attacks that are getting slaughtered, but the bodies don't show up, or they're advancing so quickly the Ukrainians don't have a chance to recover the dead Russians. Oh, I mean, like I said, there's no consistent logic with these people. They're morons.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of examples of that. I want to shift back real quick to this strategic view and this shifting world order that you mentioned a minute ago. Yeah. And one of the things that Putin also addressed in his press conference today in Beijing was this idea that President Trump is trying to or threatening to rather have big sanctions on Russia, but then secondary tariffs on China, India, and Brazil. That's one of the things that he still says he's got in his quiver and still thinking about doing it. And Putin was asked, can Trump do that? Are we at risk? And here's what he's had to say.
You have countries like India, almost 1.5 billion people, China, with powerful economies, but they also have their own domestic political mechanisms and laws. So when somebody tells you that they're going to punish you, you have to think, how can the leadership of those countries, of those big countries, which had difficult periods in their history too, that had to do with colonialism, with attacks on their sovereignty during prolonged periods of time, you have to understand that if one of them shows weakness, his political career will be over.
So what do you make of that? Because I don't think it was just by happenstance that he mentioned the colonial past, especially when it comes to India, that they can be coerced to do what the West, i.e. the United States, wants them to do.
Yeah, what has emerged now over the course of the last 3.5 years since the start of the special military operation is the dream of BRICS, of having this independent financial, trading, economic system that was outside of the reach of the United States, that it would become a reality. It has now become a reality, and it's becoming a reality much quicker than I think even Putin, Xi, and even Modi would have expected. You know, a year ago, Modi wasn't that enthusiastic about BRICS. You know, it was, attending, but it wasn't really the top of his priority. Now it's a priority. And Trump's use of tariffs, and we can talk about this a little bit later, it's predicated on a lot of false assumptions. And, you know, right now it is true that when you if you asked who are the top 10 countries that send goods, that export goods to the United States, well, India's in that top 10. They're the last of that. They're between 85 and 91 billion dollars, which is like, you know, 9% or less of the total trade. Well, that's not a lot. And in terms of India's own trade, it makes up 3% of their GDP or less, you know, 2.3%. So it's one of these issues that it's not essential for India's economic survival to have trade with the United States. Yet Donald Trump right now is pretending he reminds me of the guy who used to sell buggy whips before the automobile was really introduced. And so buggy whips were in demand because everybody's driving a buggy. But all of a sudden, then Henry Ford kicks in and starts putting out the Model A's, the Model T's. All of a sudden, he's got all these buggy whips nobody's buying. Or the same, you know, I grew up where you go out and get your 35 millimeter roll of film, put it in that camera.
I do remember that, yeah.
You have to thread it in there. Boy, that was the thing. Kodak was the king. Now, who knows Kodak? People go, what? Are we talking about the bear in Alaska?
Yeah.
So, and this is what's happening to the United States.
I'm sorry. Let me ask you something because I want to stick on this topic. Tell me how you think this was viewed. This is Trump Truth Social. This is from yesterday. He said the big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightfully honored and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day and celebration. And please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. Then it turns weird there at the end. But, you know, I have to remember, Larry, when I think it was on the occasion of that parade that Trump had this summer, when he said, we won World War II by far more than any other country. We did everything. And now then on the stage, when in China, he's wanting to say, hey, don't forget, we participated too. What do you make of all that?
Yeah. What a low class, demeaning thing for him to put out. He demonstrates his ignorance. 110,000 Marines, soldiers, and naval personnel died in the Pacific War. 110,000. The Chinese lost 3.5 million soldiers. The Chinese population as a whole that were killed by the Japanese The total figure is estimated between 15 and 20 million. Sorry, Don. We're just a footnote in what the Chinese experienced. And what he displays in that is a level of ignorance. His knowledge about a war in Pacific is based on, I think, on watching John Wayne movies and the Sands of Iwo Jima. And yes, when you watch the Hollywood version of the war in the Pacific, by God, man, we were the only ones. We were the only players. The Chinese lost 3.5 million soldiers in combat with the Japanese. Let that sink in for people. And so, yeah, when I saw that, I was just horrified by it. But the average American goes, yeah, you tell those Chinese. And, it's that kind of action by Trump that is, there's no grace in it. There's no humility in it.
Yeah.
No diplomacy. It's insulting is what it is. And, but here, the fact of the matter is the Chinese and Russians together, we keep about it, the World War II, the bloodiest war that shook the world. 60 million people died. Yeah, 60 million, maybe 70 million. Let's go with the 70 million. Of that, 47 million were either Russian or Chinese. Overwhelming majority of the deaths in World War II were experienced in those two countries. So forgive them if they're not running around wanting to kiss Donald Trump's corpulent ass on this.
And it's ironic that the United States was invited, along with the Western Europeans, to the Russian version of the Great Patriotic War celebration or so, and we refused to go or send anybody to that too.
Right.
So there's that. Okay, so that was China, but Trump wasn't finished because yesterday in the Oval Office he was asked about the situation with the tariffs on India, and he was asked, "Are you going to relax those to try to get a deal?"
Are you considering taking away some of the tariffs that you've imposed on India?
No, we get along with India very well. But India you have to understand, for many years it was a one-sided relationship. Only now, since I came along, and because of the power that we have with tariffs, India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world. They were about the highest in the world, number one. And we therefore weren't doing much business with India, but they were doing business with us because we weren't charging them foolishly. We weren't charging them. So they would send in massive, everything they made, they'd send it in, pour it into our country. Therefore, it wouldn't be made here, which is a negative. But we would not send in anything because they were charging us 100% tariff.
Now, that last number is simply inaccurate, which is the case with most numbers Trump says. Yeah. But it was true that there was higher percentage of tariffs from India than nearly any other country in the decades prior. But that was not a mistake. That was a calculated decision on consecutive American governments because we calculated that the diplomatic efforts carried more weight. And I think that there was some validity to that. But you also published another piece on Sonar 21 about this whole tariff issue. And when you hear Trump say that, and you see what's happening with BRICS and with other kinds of economic development over there, what do you say about Trump's position on these tariffs on India?
Yeah, well, for starters, trade with the United States is not the major factor driving the economies of these other countries. It's it's in the nice to have category, but it's not a critical category. And even for the United States, 11%. Our exports account for about 11% of our gross domestic product. Now, because of the size of our country, yeah, that's an incredibly large number. But the fact of the matter is, it's really another way of saying 90% of what we do economically and how our country does comes from within. So by putting the focus on tariffs, and thinking that you're going to coerce or bully these other countries where that they don't have an alternative, they most certainly do. We decided to put tariffs on Brazilian coffee. What did the Brazilians do? Okay, we'll sell directly to China now. And normally China, takes 6 months to a year to get, trade deals worked out. They did it in 24 hours with the Brazilians. Yeah, sure. Boom. But the other thing that comes out of this is that instead of these countries now going to the financial markets, the international markets, and buying U.S. dollars. So let's use the example of China and Brazil. It used to be if China was going to buy Brazilian coffee, it would have to take its RMB or renminbi currency, buy dollars with that, and then take those dollars and send them to Brazil over a system like SWIFT. And then Brazil would get the money and they send them the beans. Well, they're not doing that anymore. Brazil and China are exchanging, they're making the currencies exchanges themselves. They've settled upon what the value of the real is in Brazil with the RMB in China, and they make settlement. And so all of a sudden, the demand for the dollar is going away. Now, what happens when you've got lots of dollars out there and no demand, or even a fixed amount of dollars and lower demand? That means the price of the dollar starts falling. Then cheaper dollar on the one hand is good if you're a domestic producer in the United States that exports to other countries, because that means anything you make in the United States is cheaper. These other countries can buy it. But if you're buying stuff that's coming from outside and your dollar now has fallen in value, you're going to pay more. So what used to cost you $8 for copper wire now costs you $12 for a length of copper wire. Well, that triggers what's called inflation. So
now let me ask you this, and if this is beyond your level of expertise, just let me know. But you mentioned there about if there are either more dollars than there is demand or just weakened demand for the dollars, you have that problem. What happens in the case of, like I say, a 2008 style recession where we want to use quantitative easing to print billions of more dollars to flood the zone on that to try and help our domestic? Yeah. What would that do to that situation you just described?
Hyperinflation. It's going to trigger massive inflation. And in fact, we've already got the beginnings of it. It's right now it's anecdotal evidence, but as an example on the copper wire front, a friend of mine that does builds homes. A year ago, he was buying a roll of copper wire that for wiring, outlets and lights and such, paying $50 a roll. This year, $165 for that same roll.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's not in, so that's going to start working its way through the system. And that ends up having a lot of secondary effects here in the United States, because if all of your building materials into a brand new house are more costly, that cost of that brand new house is going to go up. And yet people are trying to afford it at a time that the interest rates are real high. So we're really working towards a perfect storm of an economic tsunami. And here's Donald Trump thinking that he can bully, coerce other countries with tariffs, and that they don't have other alternatives. And that's where he's forgetting, and that this fails. Our major trading partners, China's been one of our major trading partners, but they got other alternatives. The others are Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico's economies are dependent upon the United States, and the others are some European countries. What's really interesting is we've been running a trade surplus with Brazil. Now, normally you want to tariff the countries where you're running a deficit because, they're taking money from you. Here, Brazil's giving us money and Trump still thinks he wants to punish them. I mean, it's crazy. It makes no sense.
And, if it was just President Trump that we could say, well, he's just he's obsessed with tariffs and over exaggerates what they can accomplish, et cetera, that'd be one thing. But it's the elite in the United States that seem to say the same thing. Yeah. Here is Jack Keane, who seems to be thinking that, no, this is, in fact, just listen to the attitude that threads throughout his comments here, because the way obvious is kind of like he's saying Trump is like the daddy of the world, and he's about to punish these people who don't do what he says.
We had the Alaska summit where I take the president at face value here, where Putin discussed with him having a summit between himself and Zelensky, and then also a trilateral meeting with President Trump participating to follow that. And then we have his spokesperson yesterday, Putin's spokesperson, said, oh, there was no agreement at all, about a bilateral between President Zelensky and President Putin, nor a trilateral. So here we have where I think we are. Putin has been making these promises to the president, and he's not keeping those promises. And he's dealing with a man who's very faithful when he makes promises in President Trump. So, yeah, I think we're at that point. We're pretty close to it. And I think Trump's got a pretty big hammer that he can use, and I think he's likely going to use it.
I mean, where to start there? I mean, Trump is so faithful to do what he said, and he's got a big hammer that little old Vlad Putin, he's probably going to be shaken in his Russian boots. What say you?
Cue up Peter, Paul, and Mary. They can sing "If I Had a Hammer." if Trump had a hammer, he'd hammer in the morning. But he's not going to hammer in the morning because he doesn't have a hammer. It's really. It's getting ridiculous with his number of these bombastic threats. Yeah, you just wait and see. You wait and see, and then he ends up punching himself in the face. What is he going to do to Russia? Right now, as of last year, 3.4% of Russia's exports went to the United States. Surprise, surprise! And what was that? Uranium. Enriched uranium used to power nuclear power plants, nitrogen fertilizer that's critical for American farmers in Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois. Trump's going to make those prices more expensive, which means it hurts the American farmer and it hurts American energy. It's sort of self-defeating. So,
well, I mean, let's look at that. The assumption that we have a big hammer to play,
right,
which has got to be referring back to Lindsey Graham's sledgehammer, bone-crushing sanctions that he wanted Trump to put on China, India, Brazil as secondary sanctions and tariffs to pressure them to stop doing business with oil with Russia. What would have happened if we even attempted to bring that hammer into play on those actors? What would happen to America's economy?
Yeah, America's economy is already suffering, and it's not the terror is not going to enhance it. It's going to isolate us more. I forgot who I was talking to yesterday, but they were talking about a friend of theirs that had just come back from Spain and said that in Spain right now, the products that are dominating in the stores, Chinese products. The cars on the streets, Chinese cars, not American cars, Chinese cars. So again, I come back to the ability of somebody to make a transition when the economy is shifting into something new. And as we saw, the transition from buggies to automobiles.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Was one that the buggy whip makers missed. The United States is actually, I think, poised to miss what's taking place right now, because there was an article in the Financial Times yesterday detailing how a lot of countries around the world are refinancing their dollar debt, but not with dollars. They're doing it through other banks and doing it with foreign currencies. So again, the United States has been able to sustain this deficit spending and these, and running up. Remember in Ronald Reagan's time back in 1982, $1 trillion, that was their deficit. We're now at 35 trillion and it's growing to 36 trillion. But as long as the world was able to buy our treasuries and, buying those are basically lending us money, man, it was happy days here again. It's like, you're the college kid that's got parents give you a credit card and they pay off your credit card every month. Woohoo! We're partying every day because you don't have to pay the credit card. But what happens when all of a sudden the parents say, okay, we're done with this. You're going to pay your own damn credit card. Wait, that's a shock.
Oh, snap.
Shock to the system. That's where the United States actually is headed now, are the days in which we've been able to finance our debt, our profligate spending on the backs of other people. It's coming to an end. because India, Russia, China, Brazil, they're setting up this alternate financial system where you don't need the dollar to play. You can just use your own currencies. And all of a sudden, the US dollar, what you need us. No, we don't need you. And so once that starts settling in, all of a sudden, the power, the clout that the United States has been able to exercise over these countries starts to dissipate.
And you know, Larry, one of the reasons why we've had such success with the fiat currency since 1971 with Bretton Woods, et cetera, is because the United States was seen as a stable player.
Right.
We were seen as a safe place to put your money so that others could benefit. There was win-win opportunities or so. That is one of the things that is disintegrating probably faster than anything. And it is definitely, we can watch it in real time, shift over to both China and Russia in particular. So there was Jack Keane whining about how Putin promised Trump that he would do a bilateral and then a trilateral meeting. And then today, here in a much more calm demeanor, is President Putin addressing the issue of whether he would have a bilateral with Zelensky.
With Mr. Zelensky, I have already spoken about this. In general, I have never ruled out the possibility of such a meeting. Is there any sense in these meetings? Look, let's see. Here in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine. Some may agree with this, some may not. You just need to carefully count, read the text. The Constitution of Ukraine does not provide for any extension of the powers of the President of Ukraine at all. He was elected for 5 years. 5 years have passed, the assistance has ended. So, there is a provision according to which elections are not held under martial law. Yes, that's true. But this does not mean that the president's powers are extended. It means that his powers expire, and his rights are transferred to the Speaker of the Rada.
So, I mean, when you talk about, we've done a lot. Zelensky says, well, our Constitution doesn't allow under martial law, so I'll just keep being in charge until I decide that we're going to have elections and whatever. But Putin apparently read the document. You keep mentioning how he's a lawyer at heart.
Yeah.
Walk us through what he just said.
Well, who are you going to believe? A comedian that plays the piano with his penis, or a guy that actually went to law school and can read documents? I mean, come on.
Wasn't expecting you to go there, but
well, I mean,
please continue. I interrupted.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's the reality of what we're dealing with, that Zelensky's competent to comment on the Constitution and the law. Sorry. You know, he may be competent to comment on whether Rodney Dangerfield was a great comedian or Robin Williams was a great comedian, but, you know, forget about it. And, you know, Putin was just matter of factly saying, no, here's what the law says. Now, you may disagree with it because lawyers can have disagreements, but it highlights what the issue is, because what Putin was intimating there is, if he'll meet with the head of the Rada, because at least under the Constitution of Ukraine, then any agreement worked out between Russia and Ukraine would be valid and legitimate according to the Ukrainian Constitution. But that's not what, you know, the head of the Rada is not even on the table now. But the other thing Putin emphasized is, look, we got a lot to work through, a lot of agreements and issues that have to be discussed before we even have that kind of meeting. Because we're not going to get to the meeting to try to work that out ourselves. We're going to have others discuss this. Foreign Minister Lavrov, or the Deputy Foreign Minister Rybkov, or Medinsky, who's leading the current negotiating team. You know, let them do their work. So this, as we talked about at the outset, this is going to end militarily. This is not going to end through diplomacy or negotiations.
And only because we won't let it.
Right.
Not because the Russians don't want it. They do, I think. I think they've never said anything besides that, and we have never said anything except pushing against that. That's the perverse part. But
yeah,
I mean, we are where we are.
And if you saw Gerasimov, you know, I know that you talked about this the other day in one of your monologues. You know, when Gerasimov gave his summary of what the state of the war was, you know, it was the most comprehensive explanation you've had since really 2022. And what the message he sent with the map that was behind him on the wall, which showed, oh, they've got Nikolaev and Odessa and Transnistria. Those are all identified as Russian territory too. Maybe he's sending a message.
Well, this is going. Yeah. And I think it's now President Putin today has reiterated that we're either going to go militarily, and when he says accomplish our objectives, that doesn't mean go to the administrative borders of the four oblasts. That's only on the negotiating terms. If they don't get that, probably that map is closer to reality than anything that the Ukraine would wish. But anyway, we'll wait and see where that's going to go because a lot of things have to happen in between now and then. But in the amount of time we got, I'm sorry, do you have something else to add?
Well, I was just going to say, remember the other thing he said was, if the people in Dnipropetrovsk, he didn't say the specific ones, but this was the implication. The people in Dnipropetrovsk, in Kharkiv, in Poltava, in Sumy, if they decide they want to join Russia and they vote to do so, come on in. So he was leaving that on the table too.
Yeah, well, that would be even more problematic. But let's hope that saner heads can somehow prevail between now and then. I doubt it, but I hope it. In the amount of time we got left, I want to go to something else that's been happening in the last 24 hours or so. Yesterday, actually, while we were on the air, President Trump made a comment from the Oval Office where he announced that the United States used lethal military action against an alleged Trinidad terrorist group, otherwise known as a cartel, gang members, blew up one of their drug boats out in the middle of the Caribbean Ocean in international waters, allegedly killing 11 people. I have not really counted 11 people in the images that were shown, but looks like there's some people in there. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of anything else in there. Looks like there's a handful of people in there, but I don't know that I see a bunch of drugs in there. What do you make of this, Larry?
This is a war crime by the United States, pure and simple. Look, if this was a boat carrying drugs, then U.S. Coast Guard or the U.S. naval ships could have intercepted it, boarded it, confiscated the drugs, arrested the individuals in question, and given them a chance to plea bargain their way out by getting information from them. Okay, who's your boss? How's you work up the food chain. This was a pure act of murder. You didn't see that boat firing at any of the U.S. naval personnel or ships. No, they weren't. So it comes down to like self-defense with a handgun. Just because you don't like the looks of somebody or how they're talking doesn't mean you can pull their gun out and shoot them. If they pose a direct threat to you, if they threaten your life, or imminent grave physical damage, then yeah, you can shoot them. Those conditions were not present here. So this is God, I'm so sick and tired of these Americans, of my American citizens that celebrate the murder of people because we label, they're a terrorist, so we can kill them. No, in this case, again, when you've got the number of ships that are deployed, the naval force that's present, and I would also assume there's got to be some Coast Guard vessels around. Stopping a boat like that is very, very easy. And unless they are firing at you, you can board them, take them into custody, and again, demonstrate, see what we've been saying about Maduro? Here are the drugs. Here are the personnel. Here's who they work for. You don't get any of that. You kill them and say, we know. Just trust us. This is awful.
And what impact? Because I was going to say Secretary of Defense or State, but Rubio seems to be lobbying to be Secretary of War when he said that we are going to go after these guys and we were going to use almost very martial military means to go after them, stop this drug trade, etc. Are we going to succeed in stopping the drug trade by this kind of action?
No, heavens no. It won't work. The way you stop the drug trafficking is go after the money. But the reason they don't go after the money is because the corporations and companies that profit by what's called the trade-based money laundering, and that involves where the drug proceeds are used to purchase goods in the United States and purchase large quantities of them, and then have those shipped to Colombia or to Mexico, where then those goods can be resold, and in reselling them, then the drug traffickers recoup their investment and recoup their money. But the problem when you do that is you're going to go after corporations like Philip Morris. You go after foreign corporations like Diageo that does liquor. You go after John Deere. You go after Caterpillar. You go after, almost every U.S. corporation is in a situation where their products are being purchased with drug money, and we look the other way. We saw this. I think I mentioned this before. I had firsthand experience with this. Me and my other two partners, we were signing up Mexico as a client to sue Wachovia Bank under a civil RICO for its role in laundering $800 billion of Mexican drug money. And the Obama administration sent Eric Holder down to Mexico to threaten them that if they did that, then Mexico would be facing grave punishment by the United States. Instead of saying, yeah, hey, Mexico, we're with you. Want to help clean up this drug trafficking? No, there's too much money involved. That's what this is all about. It's all about the money. And
so now, when I mentioned this on my show earlier this morning, where I specifically talked about this incident here, and I couldn't help but think of the analogies, and I'm glad I have you on to ask if you see a similar one. When we had all kinds of boisterous discussions in March of this year about how we were going to shut down the Houthis in the Red Sea.
Mhm.
We were going to bring all this power to bear, and Secretary of State, or Secretary of Defense, Hegseth said, yeah, we were going to be relentless until they stop, et cetera. And then 2 months later, we just kind of rolled up our sleeves and went home. What do you expect to happen here when we have similar declarations of what we're going to do?
Well, it's the same. I mean, they're trying to portray Maduro as this big drug cartel guy. He's not. I mean, the drug cartels are in Colombia and in Mexico, and then there's also some significant criminal activity organization down in Brazil. So but again, the money flows. If you don't have to confront the guys making the drugs. If they can't make money off of it, they're going to stop. And you can seize their product. They can make more cocaine, but man, you seize their money.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Since you've worked in this, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But that's part of the marketing or plan, part of the economic plan. They know they're going to get a certain amount taken, so they calculate that in at the beginning. So that's not a big issue, and especially allegedly, some very small amount of something was in that boat here. But what's the end game here? What does the administration, given the realities you just mentioned about the money and going after that, what do they accomplish by something like this? And what do you think is going to come next, say just in the next month or two?
Trump is one of two things. If Trump decides to actually militarily attack Venezuela and put U.S. Marines on the ground, there are going to be a lot of dead Marines coming home in body bags, because navigating that terrain from the coast up into Caracas, you're going up a mountain road. It's about an hour drive, last I recall, and there are ambush points all along that road. Or you say, well, we'll airlift a helicopter. Sorry, the Venezuelans got some shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, and they're likely to shoot down some of those helicopters, if not all of them. So it's either that, it's some sort of military debacle, or Trump will just move on to something else, like he did with the Houthis, just declare victory and leave. Maduro is likely to still be in place, because this attack on Maduro is, instead of uniting the other countries of Central and South America coming to the United States and saying, yeah, let's go get them, they're just the opposite. The legacy of U.S. bullying in Central and South America, we'd actually sort of started moving away from that in the 1990s, but boy, it's back. It's back with big time with Trump, because remember, he's going to take control of the Panama Canal and take it over from the Panamanians. So it's just, what if you're the average person living in, whether it's in Caracas, Venezuela, or Bogota, Colombia, or Panama City, Panama, you're looking up north and going, look, los gringos son locos. The gringos have gone crazy.
Yeah, I kind of look up and say the same thing, but I just don't say it in Spanish. Well, we'll wait and see. We're going to certainly continue to monitor all these situations here, but in my view, they're all trending negatively for our interests, and I would sure love to see a few U-turns. This is one of the cases I'd be okay with the flip-flop. Stop doing something stupid and harmful, and let's go back to something that makes a little sense. But we have what we have. So, but always appreciate you coming on and giving us your views here, and appreciate you sharing stuff on sonar21.com. We always love to go see the stuff that you have there, and you guys don't have to wait till next week when you see him back on our show again. You can go check him out there. In the meantime, we appreciate you guys. We're going to be back on in about an hour with one of my colleagues from Defense Priorities, Jennifer Kavanaugh. We're going to be going into a little bit more depth on what's going on with this shift in the global power structures that we've been seeing here and what the risks are for the United States. Be sure and join us then. We'll see you on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.